Hey guys, it's Joey, and today on this scorcher of a Tuesday, I thought we would talk a little A24. Now, over the last couple of years, A24 has really come into the public lexicon. Everybody from film buffs to casual viewers know A24, and they know what they'll get when they watch an A24 movie to an extent. They've done such a good job at establishing that brand, establishing that style, the vibe, if you will, of their movies and kind of the way they communicate those movies. I think some of their marketing is top notch. And now somebody who considers themselves sort of a casual film buff, I think A24 has a lot of fantastic movies. There's a lot of overrated stuff as well. And I just think it's a good mix of really good quality movies, some more fun kind of popcorn movies, and a lot in between. So today I thought I would share some of my favorites so far. There's a lot of good stuff coming out of A24 lately, but I feel like some of the best stuff has come out the last couple of years. And I'm a big fan of that studio and always curious to see what comes next with them. And I think they're only going upwards. Their deals are getting bigger. They're bringing in bigger stars. They're doing bigger stories. And it seems like they haven't totally lost sight of what's important yet. They definitely choose their projects carefully, it seems. And some of them hit. Some of them are just really nice looking and vibey, but maybe the story's not so there. I'm looking at You, Green Knight. And then there's just like a lot of diversity in the kind of stories they tell. A lot of people relate A24 horror films. They call them elevated horror. I mean, that doesn't only apply to A24 films. It's kind of more of a psychological, dreamy, surrealist kind of style. But anyway, I'm going to get into my top 5. Let me know in the comments what your favorites are. I'm really curious to see what you think. I have not watched every A24 movie, but these are just a few of my favorites that kind of rose to the top. So number 5 is The Florida Project by Sean Baker, directed by Sean Baker. This was probably one of the early ones I actually saw, and the story just fascinated me. I had heard about it through the grapevine. This one came actually word of mouth, and people were talking it up. They said it was just like a great story about these kids that live in kind of the outskirts of Disney World, and they weren't able to afford to go to Disney World, but they were so close to it. And it's kind of heartbreaking, but you see the kind of this world through the kids' eyes, and what, you know, an average adult might think is kind of like, I don't know, a crappy kind of area, kind of run down, pretty poor area. These kids are having the time of their lives. And the mom is trying to really keep things together, but she's struggling herself. And William Dafoe's character is also, you know, trying the best he can, and he's helping these people to the best of his ability. And it's a beautiful story. It's kind of heartbreaking, and it's shot so beautifully, and it doesn't take much to just get into the shoes of those kids, and while they're trying to, you know, make a Disney World of their own, make this imaginary fantasy world of their own, in the kind of, you know, poorly maintained area that they live in, to be perfectly nice. It's such a good, authentic feeling kind of story that it tugs at the heartstrings. I've been meaning to rewatch it actually, because it does such a good job of, you know, bringing you into the lives of these people who are not having a good go of it, but, you know, they persevere, and the kids dream really big despite everything. And there's some, from like a filmmaker perspective, there's some really good writing stuff in there, and technical stuff. I think one of the scenes, I won't spoil anything, one of the scenes is shot kind of on a mobile rig, I believe. So there's like some cool stuff there for kind of the nerdy filmmaker types that want to know kind of technical details. But this is one of the things that established what A24 was for me. This is the kind of story I had been wanting to see, and told in the way that spoke to me, in a style that was also really gorgeous, and the actors were super endearing, and everything about it was, I think, really well done. So that's my number 5. My number 4 is Under the Silver Lake by David Robert Mitchell, with Andrew Garfield. This movie is kind of all over the place. As somebody who's a big David Lynch fan, there's part of this movie that feels like it's almost making fun of the way David Lynch films are kind of perceived, with kind of just like the ongoing mystery and everybody kind of picking apart every little detail of it, trying to solve this unsolvable thing. But then it turns out, without spoiling anything again, turns out that maybe some of the stuff is like it does a good job of not only being satirical of the never ending mystery kind of trope or plot device, whatever you want to call it, but it has a lot of fun with it, and it does a lot of goofy stuff, and it's scary at times. And Andrew Garfield is fantastic in it. He plays obsessive very well. I've seen David Robert Mitchell's other film. I did not like that one as much as I like this one. This one just seemed almost like an epic in figuring out a mystery or not figuring it out, or being somewhere kind of in the gray in between. If you have not watched that one yet, I feel like that one is not talked about enough. That one kind of flew under the radar a little bit, but I think it's so good, and I think it's worth watching. It's definitely an A24 movie that's worth watching if you're not sure where to start or you're kind of looking for your next viewing. I would highly recommend Under the Silver Lake. Let me know what you think if you check it out. Okay, number 3. These are going to start probably getting a little predictable, but Uncut Gems is number 3 for me, by the Safdie brothers. This is a masterpiece in tension building. If you have not seen this movie, maybe you should bring like a belt to bite down on or some kind of fidget thing. Obviously, don't do that in the theater. But like this will get your anxiety through the roof in a good way, I would say. Some people might disagree. But this story, and Adam Sandler, I've always been a big Adam Sandler fan, and he kills it in this. And it takes place about a decade ago, maybe a little bit more, in New York City. And it tells that story in New York City very well. And you get the tension of the city as well as the tension of the story going on. And you're not sure if you should sympathize with almost anybody in this story because everybody seems kind of a mess and kind of like big jerks, to put it lightly. But it's so well done technically, like soundtrack, script, dialogue, just the choices these characters make are choices that you hope people out there probably don't make, but let's be realistic. There's definitely people making choices like those characters every day, and it just ramps up and it keeps going up. It keeps ramping and never stops. The tension just gets more, and things just keep happening, and things get almost to an absurd level of hyper like realism, where it's like it can't get any worse from here, and it does. So for that, Uncut Gems is definitely one of my favorite, not only A24 films, but definitely one of my favorite films of all time, especially over the last few years. I feel like a lot of people have seen this one at least by now, but if you have not yet, check it out. Okay, number 2 is a weird one. I know people are pretty divisive when it comes to this movie, but number 2 is The Lighthouse by Robert Eggers. I feel like anytime I talk to anybody about The Lighthouse, somebody had a very different experience with this movie. For me, I didn't take this movie super seriously. I really don't know if it was meant to be taken seriously. Actually, just talked to somebody about it, and they said they didn't like it. They didn't think it was that interesting, but I've kind of tried to reframe it as if you look at it as kind of a comedy, kind of a dark comedy, it becomes a lot funnier. I definitely saw it in the theater, and there was a couple people laughing during it. Some people were confused by the laughter, but this is another film where things become so absurd, and the character's choices become so absurd, and then it falls into sort of this surreal landscape of, you don't know what's what, but they behave so bizarrely and sometimes so stupidly, and some of the dialogue is just straight up hilarious to me. I don't know how people don't find certain parts of it funny. Aren't ye fond of me lobster?
You're fond of me lobster, ain't you?
Drunken in a Virginia fence.
I seen it. You're fond of me lobster.
Kills me every time. You went and spilled your beans, or however he says it. Hilarious. I can't watch that movie without cracking up, and especially at certain scenes, the way they look is just so funny. Like, they're just two wackos at a lighthouse in the middle of the ocean, just like losing their minds. I mean, there are parts of it that are definitely kind of sad, but I think a lot of it is really funny. There's definitely creepy parts to it, but I think people just need to recontextualize the way they watch that movie. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think The Lighthouse is hysterical. And for my number one pick, many of you who have been on this channel for a while probably see this coming, but my number one pick is Midsommar by Ari Aster. This is definitely one of my favorite movies of the last few years. This is like The Lighthouse, taken in such drastically different ways. It is definitely a creepy movie. It's definitely a very funny movie, depending on your state of mind when you're seeing it. I always like to tell a story. I saw this movie, I think, 2 or 3 times in the theater. First time I saw it, people were horrified. Second time I saw it, mixed reactions. And then I saw the director's cut in theaters, and people were dying of laughter. So it really depends on who you are and what you think is funny. But obviously, Midsommar deals with some pretty heavy issues and can be pretty gory and visceral at times. But I thought it was really funny. And I think the cast was phenomenal. Ari Aster is just such a good director. Definitely like this more than Hereditary. It's so layered. There's so many things going on. There's so many ways to perceive how these characters behave and what their intentions are. And there's just all these subtleties. And that's why I love it. I just feel like it's good on almost every level. I spent so much time thinking about this movie and like rewatching it. And I almost come to a different conclusion on who's like good or bad, or, obviously you kind of land that nobody's one thing, obviously, but it's like everybody just has their own motivations in this, and they do such a good job at, not really highlighting all of it, but, it's little things people say, and then other things people say, and you kind of connect them. What did they mean there? What did they mean there? Did that mean that? I don't know if I'm overthinking it. Maybe I'm under the silver laking it. But it's just the performances are so nuanced and so good. And I'm a big fan of the original theatrical cut, not a crazy big fan of the director's cut, because most of the theatrical is in the daytime. The movie takes place in the daytime. And in the director's cut, there's a scene that takes place at night. I love the fact that it's a horror film that takes place mostly during the day. And it's another one where tension kind of builds and strange things start happening, and you start feeling like you're hallucinating or falling into the trap as well. And I just love that when the audience, you're basically, the audience is going through it with the characters. I love stuff like that. I think Midsommar does such a great job at doing that. Ari Aster pulls that off, because some people don't realize it's happening. Especially if you're really into the movie, you get sucked in, you get pulled into kind of this world where you don't really know what's going on. You don't understand the language. You're kind of just being pushed along the way. And by the end, you don't know where you stand. You don't know what you just watched or what decisions the characters just made. You don't know if they understood what decisions they were making. I could go into a whole thing about Midsommar, but those are my top 5. If you have watched any of them, let me know your thoughts on this list below. Do you disagree with some of it? Do you agree with it? Let me know what some of your favorite A24 movies are. Be very interested in knowing. And if you're new to the channel, please subscribe and let me know what other kinds of videos you'd like to see from me. Please forgive the studio at this time. We are moving. So I will have a new setup hopefully within the next few weeks. But until then, I'll see you later. Have a good week, and catch you next time.